Good evening, everyone. I'm Dawn Russell from Intuit, and I am a design strategist at Intuit. And when I got interested in the topic of empathy, I was actually a design manager at Intuit, and I met Bern, and she and I met at UXPA in 2015, and then we decided, let's talk. We were both doing separate talks on empathy, and then we said, oh, next year, let's come back and let's do something coordinated, and then she pulled in Dr. Joseph Lee, and so now we're a happy family again tonight. It's kind of awesome. We're doing a reprise of UXPA. So I'm going to talk about how you create a customer-driven culture, especially in a large organization, although this could really apply to any organization. So my journey in really becoming interested in empathy started about 4 years ago. I was hired to lead the user experience design team in a technical organization within Intuit. And prior to hiring me, this organization had never had a user experience team. It was largely back-end engineers working on APIs. And our senior VP decided, well, we're creating experiences by creating these APIs. She was very forward-thinking in that way. We need user experience designers to make sure that we're designing these APIs effectively. And so that's how it started. They hired me, and I said, 500 engineers, that's interesting, to a ratio of, at the time, 3 designers. What do we do? It was a little scary. And so essentially we decided we have to figure out how to help other people create great experiences. It can't only be us when there's 3 of us relative to 500 other people. So that's really how my journey began. And we tried lots of things along the way. I'm going to share some of the success stories as well as maybe some of the horror stories. We'll see. So in an ideal world, customer empathy is really something that your whole organization feels deeply and embraces. And it goes beyond user research, goes beyond design. It's really about being in the heart and mind of the people who are using your products and really understanding deeply how they think and they feel, how they behave. And a lot of times that's different than ourselves. So we have found that the best products actually come when the whole organization has that understanding. Because along the way in creating a product, there's so many people who touch the product experience. It goes well beyond our wireframes and our prototypes and our visual design assets. Whatever ends up in the hands of the customers is what matters, and so many people make decisions every single day that impact that. And so the more those people are grounded in what the actual end users are experiencing and feeling, we found you end up with a better product, and the user experience design team can be so much more effective. So that's really what I'm going to talk about today. And I'll say just a few words about Intuit, where I work. Our mission is to improve our customers' financial lives so profoundly they can't imagine going back to the old way. And those are some of our flagship products at the bottom there. And we serve small businesses, accountants, and consumers. And so one of the challenges for us has been, how do we not only get our engineers to understand one customer segment, but how do we get them to understand 3 that are actually quite different? And so I'm going to talk about how we've done that. And so you may be asking yourself, I don't know, maybe you're not, why does it matter if an engineer has empathy? And I love this quote from Marty Kagan. I heard it even before I started my empathy journey, but it stuck with me. And he said, the magic happens when developers get and see customer pain, because the biggest single source of innovation is typically the engineers. They know what's possible better than anyone. And so there's this magical thing that can happen when you partner an amazing designer with an amazing engineer who also cares about the customer, because not only are they then just following the instructions of the designer and executing that code really well, but they're contributing in a way that's kind of amazing. They're pushing the boundaries of technology and design, and that's really what we've started to see in our organization. So I'll tell you a little bit about how we made this happen. And so we're like, well, 500 engineers need to have empathy. That's going to take a while. And it has, but we were realistic about that up front. So we decided to do this in a staged approach. And so we decided in stage one, the only thing we really wanted to focus on in stage one is setting the foundation for people to even care about empathy in the first place. So we decided we had this goal of helping everyone understand what empathy was and embracing the concept of empathy and that it was an important part of their job. And so that was really all we focused on in stage one. And so the things we did were, we called it We Bring It To You, because it was very much like we would hand them things on a platter and, then they would consume it, hopefully. So we would go out and do research, but we would broadly share those insights. We would bring in customer panels and allow the engineers to not only hear what the customers were saying, but even, potentially ask questions or interact with them in some way. And then we created these things called empathy kits, which I'm going to show you a little snippet of what that looked like. But that was meant to be an experiential thing that we brought to them. So they didn't even have to leave the office in order to get in the shoes of the customer. And then in stage two, by the way, stage one, we spent about 12 to 18 months. It wasn't like a completely linear journey, but I'd say about 12 months, we started kind of ramping down stage one, and then stage two, we started ramping up. Stage two is really about having other people practice and build the muscle. And so this wasn't, one thing that I want to address is that this wasn't about turning 500 engineers into user researchers, because clearly that's not going to work. I mean, user researchers are very highly skilled people, and they do what they do very well. So that wasn't what we were trying to do at all. So I want to make the distinction between research and empathy for the purposes of this. What we were trying to get them to do is understand the customer and feel that as they're making decisions every single day. And so the kinds of things that we did were we actually created interview guides for them. And we would say, here, these are the kinds of open-ended questions you should be asking customers. And then we'd bring in customers and have them talk to them. We did skills workshops, I'll talk about that a little bit, where we helped them get better at listening and asking those open-ended questions. And then we also did coaching in individual, intact product teams, so we could kind of up-level one team at a time. And then stage three is nirvana, which we haven't, frankly, reached yet. But, that's really where empathy is in the DNA. And, instead of pushing things out, people are really pulling us in constantly and going out to the customers and leaving the building. But in this, we've sort of dipped our toes in the water here. And so that's where we kind of would do more advanced skills techniques. And we would actually focus more on recruiting the customers, and because there would be so much demand to talk to customers, we would have to do that, and allow them to share their insights across a broad organization. So I'm going to talk about some of the methods we've used. So this is the life of an accountant during tax season. It's not pretty. So their customers literally drop off these giant boxes of paperwork that they then have to sort through. Much of that paperwork is completely irrelevant to the tax process, to the tax preparation process. But the customers don't know that. They hire an accountant to figure that out. So they have to sort through these mountains of paperwork. And it's a quite complex job. So we had the challenge of saying, well, how do we get 500 engineers to understand what it's like to be an accountant? Clearly, we can't take 500 people out to talk to individual accountants. That's not scalable or practical. And we can't even have them do what an accountant does because they don't have the knowledge. So we had to think outside the box a little bit on this one. And we actually did a role-playing exercise where we did something called an analogous activity, where the goal is to create an activity that simulates the same emotions that the customer would feel, but through a different activity. And so we created a SurveyMonkey with a Dropbox kind of linked behind it, where we facilitated a 15-minute exercise, and the engineers had to go through and pretend to be an accountant talking to a client. And so you can see they went through the survey, and then we gave them a little worksheet to kind of tabulate very simple things, not the kinds of things that an accountant would do, but sort the red papers into one pile, sort the orange papers into another pile, etc. And then tally those things up. So these are the kinds of things that accountants do, but obviously the content of what they do is much more complex. So one of the pain points that accountants have during tax season which was highlighted in that video there, is that not only do they get that giant shoebox, but sometimes with all kinds of stuff that doesn't matter, sometimes the stuff that they really need is not in the shoebox. So they have to nag clients, and that's one of their biggest pain points. And they are highly skilled professionals, but they spend a lot of their time doing stuff that is frankly kind of, not highly skilled work, right? Sorting things and nagging their clients. So we did these exercises. It took 15 minutes. Well, we gave them a 15-minute time limit. Not everyone completed, because we wanted to simulate the urgency that an accountant feels during tax season. And we did those in groups so that we could do a debrief afterwards in a group setting. And the amazing thing is that the adjectives that our engineers felt after 15 minutes, stressful, rushed, time pressed, frustrated, Mary, which one of the clients made me mad, these are the same things that our accountants say they feel during tax season. And they could feel the urgency, they really got into the shoes of the accountant without ever having to step foot into an accountant's office or become an accountant. So it was very useful in that way. We did have to prototype this activity many times to get it right. So we would pilot it, in very small groups, and we probably iterated on this 4 or 5 times to get it exactly right, so that they were feeling the right emotions, it was taking the right amount of time, etc. But we did get there. Another thing that we did is we had our senior leadership interview customers, because one of the problems that I saw in the organization was that the most senior leaders were very connected to our stakeholders, but a lot less connected to what the end users were experiencing. And so we created guides for them to go out and talk to customers. And the amazing thing was, and then we had them come together and debrief and share what they learned, their insights, with a broad group. And one of the amazing things was that well, they learned things, which surprised them, actually. But some of them were so enthusiastic about what they learned that they started doing more without us even asking them. In fact, one of our leaders went out and interviewed 7 customers right after, made a video compilation, and shared it at our senior leadership meeting and to all of his staff, and we were like, whoa, that's amazing. So the reason it's so important, I think, to start with leadership is because they're the ones who make all the decisions about things that matter to us, like staffing, And so once they start seeing that this empathy thing is really important, they not only, are committed to adding more resources against it, but they're committed to allowing their engineers to spend time on something that they might have seen before as like kind of a fluffy thing. Well, if you're not coding, then you're not productive. And then after this exercise, they're like, wait a minute, you can't actually create a great product unless you understand the customer. So that shift happened very naturally. And then we also did skills workshops. So we intentionally did not call it an interviewing workshop. We called it a listening workshop because we wanted to put the emphasis on the customer talking, not the engineer or whomever was, speaking. And so we gave them some tips on the mindsets to go in with, when you're listening to a customer. And we gave them practice activities. So they practiced on each other first before we, opened up actual customers for them to talk to. And then we gave them these little cards which fit inside their badge holder that had, good best practices and then pitfalls. And amazing thing is people started putting them in their badge and like carrying them around and actually using them. So that worked. And then one of the barriers that we started to see once people were interested, they understood empathy, they were like, yeah, this is important, is they were like, well, how do we get access to customers? And so that started to become a little bit of a limiting factor. And we're like, we got to get that barrier out of the way because people are excited to talk to customers. Hello, we did our jobs. So we started hosting customer office hours where we would recruit the customers and we would send out a schedule and say, hey, sign up for half-hour increments. And these are the profiles of the customers that will be here. And then, all types of people, mostly engineers, would actually show up and talk to the customers. And it really started changing the way they thought about the customers. I want to say one more thing about that. So another anecdote was one of our designers decided that in addition to the customer office hours, he was going to institute a thing where the whole Scrum team would go out twice a week for 15 minutes, so half hour total every week, and they would read customer emails, they would read transcripts of customer support calls, they would even go on Twitter and see what people were saying on social media, and then they would come together as a group and talk about what they were learning. And before he started doing that, the engineers were saying things like, oh, well, the sign-in API is broken, we need to fix it. And something really shifted after a few weeks of them reading the customer problems in their own words, and they would started saying things like, Andrew, this designer's name was Andrew, they'd be, Andrew, customers can't log in, we gotta fix this, And so not only did their language change from something very technical, like I gotta fix that API, to customers can't sign in, that's a problem, but also the level of urgency and the level of ownership shifted, right? The engineers were seeking the designer out and saying, hey, we gotta fix this, as opposed to the designer, really trying to pull them in. So some of my final thoughts are, if you start to try to engage your organization in empathy, it's a very beautiful and noble cause, but expect a wide range of reactions, including skepticism and apathy. That's to be expected. But what will happen is that you'll start to see champions who will then bring other people along. And so another engineer telling another engineer that they should really be talking to a customer is actually way more influential than a designer saying, hey, you should be talking to your customer. So it'll naturally happen, but at first it may take a little while. And then identify those champions. So when you see that engineer who's like going around and telling other engineers, hey, we need to go to customer office hours, like raise the visibility of that person, reward them, tell their boss how awesome they are, whatever you need to do to make that happen. And then, managing the logistics, we just decided we were going to tap into as many existing things that we could as possible, so we didn't have to create operating mechanisms. So like, for example, the customer panels, we'd bring them into our all hands that were already scheduled, or sharing out those insights, we would do that kind of thing as well. So we knew that it was gonna reach the entire organization, and we didn't have to schedule something separate. So that's just a little kind of logistical tip. We had an executive sponsor, which was super important. And I think from the get-go, if we had not had that, it would have been a little bit more difficult, not impossible, but I would say that was really important, and I would definitely recommend trying to get somebody at the top to really buy in, even if it's just having them interview a customer and then having that shift occur within them. That can actually propel you forward. And then, be patient and flexible. Like I said, we had to prototype a lot of the things that we rolled out to the organization to get it right. We, designed our empathy program. So that's just part of the process. It's like any other design process. So here's my information. One thing you should know about me is that I am leaving on a plane to Thailand, like right now, after this talk. So unfortunately, I won't be able to stay around for Q&A here. However, that's my Twitter handle, that's my email. A bunch of the stuff that I created for this program is on a blog, much more than I was able to share tonight. So please reach out if you have other questions, if you want to do something like this at your company. Thank you so much.